For today's mastermind. We were talking yesterday, Bob and I, about the market of the moment and just what we can expect from this year's fall market with the trends that we're seeing. So we wanted to have a discussion about that today and pick your brains and see what you guys think and share some information with you as far as what Bob's seeing on his end.
That's right. Yeah, and we can start with that if you want to, just to kind of lay the groundwork.
Absolutely.
So obviously you guys are living in the same world that we are, where there's multiple offers made on on every property, it seems. 10 years ago we couldn't give a house away, and now a ranch in Carver is going for 30 grand over asking with a dozen offers. It's just insane out there. I've never seen anything like it. But really now, for the first time, for the first time, we're seeing a pattern, I think, of purchase appraisals coming in low. I think that's something that, we touched on a little bit when Bob Hadge visited this, our mastermind here. But, if you think about it, in an appreciating market, a house should never appraise out, right? Because if the market's appreciating, and we're basing the value of my purchase on a sale that happened 3 months ago or 6 months ago, how can we do that if the market is appreciating, right? But really, for the most part, over from 2012 to 2019, I think we saw, houses going for over asking, but it wasn't like it is now. So we saw probably a 3, 4, 5% appreciation rate on average, let's say, and an appraiser can kind of absorb those hits, in an appraisal to justify it. But when we're already on our tiptoes from a purchase price perspective, when the house goes in the market, and that $450,000 home goes for 30 grand over asking, and now we're looking at a 7% increase over true market value. An appraiser can't, a creative appraiser can't be that creative, without just giving bunk comps, right? So I just think for the first time, we're really seeing appraisals coming in somewhat regularly. I would say it's not the majority of purchase appraisals, but definitely, a good amount. Let's say if I had to guess, 20 to 30% of the purchase appraisals coming in low. But I would also say too, what surprises me a bit is when you do make that phone call and say, hey, the house that was on for 450, that's under agreement now for 485. Didn't appraise out, appraisal came in at 475. Like, people are shocked, and it's like, come on, guys. Like, the house went for over asking. Borrowers, offered the over sales price on this. And, realtors, what the comps are, right? So I just really feel like, as a listing agent, if a house goes for over asking, I think that's wonderful. And I know a lot of people on this call do have that conversation with their sellers about, hey guys, we put it on for 450. It's under agreement for 475. That's awesome. But don't count that extra $25,000 yet. Hopefully it happens, but we still have to get over that appraisal hump. Or you address it with the buyers, when they do make that offer over asking and they get that house, or even if they're in the running for it, maybe having that conversation with the buyer's agent saying, all right, so they're offering 475. The house was on for 450. Can your buyer either drop the appraisal contingency, or is your buyer willing to pay the difference if the house doesn't appraise out for that 475, but for more than, but for at that 450, right? And having those conversations with the buyers, because, if you have an FHA buyer with max financing 3.5% down, and you accept their offer for 475 and the house appraises at 450, it's unlikely that that borrower is going to have the extra money to come to the closing with, right? Because they're max financing already, and if they had the extra 10% to put down, they probably would have put it down, if they wanted to. So these are conversations I think it's really important to have up front during the negotiating process, and not backtrack, 3 or 4 weeks after the offer is accepted, when that lender finally gets the appraisal in. Now, a month down the road, you're having that conversation with your sellers, and it just doesn't, typically go pretty well. And by the way, and this is something Alicia and I talked about, when you as a listing agent get an offer that's at asking or over asking and the house doesn't appraise out, holy crap, you guys did your job, right? You guys as realtors got someone to go under agreement on a home for more than that house was worth on that day, right? Per the appraisal. So it's not, that shouldn't be an uncomfortable conversation for you to have with your sellers as a listing agent, because you guys truly just went above and beyond, right? It's kind of a bummer the other way, like back in the old days when we might have seen a house go under agreement for 450 and you know, the house appraises for 475 the other way because we're in a depreciating market, right?
Right.
So just something to think about there. And I just want to kind of open that up and see what your thoughts were on that, guys.
Yeah, guys, please feel free to unmute yourselves and, you know, chime in with different perspectives and things that you're seeing as far as like where you stand in working with sellers and buyers in the market today. We'd love to hear from you.
Good morning, everyone. I don't have like an experience with this, but I do have a question regarding you get in an offer in, it's over asking, the appraisal comes in, and now the person that put in the offer doesn't have that extra cash. And what do you do when you have multiple bids and now they're all at the same amount because that one client that overbid can't afford to come up with that cash? What do you do at that point?
And that's what we're kind of talking about, right? Where if you address that at the beginning, then I think it's a much easier conversation to have, because at that point you have the option of going with, you know, one of the other people that made the offers, right? Made an offer. If they're all the same number. But if, you know, after, you know, you get your offer accepted, within a week you do the home inspection, within a week you do the purchase and sale agreement, then they're applying for financing. And then maybe within 2 or 3 weeks, that appraisal comes back in now, right? And that might even be generous. So a month to 5 weeks after the offer is accepted, typically is when you'll get that appraisal back. That's like a lifetime, you know, for people. So to have that conversation at that point with your sellers is really tough. And to try to go back to one of those other people who made one of the offers on your home at that point, they might have already been under agreement and closed on another house, you know, at that point. So you might have lost them. Does that make sense, Scott? And you're muted again. There you go.
Yeah. What I was thinking was, you know, not necessarily with your clients, but if you're the seller, your client's the seller, you've already had that conversation, and now the appraisal came back, and now you have 3 offers because the other 2 offers that came in initially were all at the same point. Do you have an obligation to stick with the same offer that now has come down? Or can you say, you know, you couldn't come up with the cash, so now we have multiple offers, we're going to go with this offer over here, vice your offer? That's more or less what I'm looking at, not necessarily what to the, you know, having the conversation with the seller, because hopefully we would already have that conversation. Am I making sense, or am I kind of going around?
I can jump in. I think what Bob is saying is those other sellers, those other buyers are gone.
Right.
You're so far down the road to the closing, those other buyers are gone. You need to go find either new buyers,
right?
Means you're putting the house back on the market, or you need to figure a way forward with the current buyer.
Oh, of course, yeah. I'm, you know, thinking, okay, fingers crossed, those other buyers are still available, I guess.
Well, they may or may not be.
Yeah,
right, exactly. They may or may not be.
But as Bob said, once you get to that appraisal stage, you're pretty far down the road with that transaction. And, you know, you psychologically become that's much more committed to the transaction, and the 2 parties are committed to fulfilling.
Right.
To shift gears, you know, a month or more into it, you'd have to have a really strong reason to do so, I think.
You're gonna love the one you're with. Love the one you're with. Because you're starting at the beginning again. You're going to have to do another home inspection. Right. You're another 8 weeks, you know, 6 weeks out at the best.
Right. Okay. Just I was just thinking.
Yeah, when you get to that, that phase in it, Scott, you really need to have had that conversation with the client ahead of time, and communication is really the key factor here.
Right.
Is making sure that we're setting expectations, we're communicating all the way through. Having that conversation with the seller up front. Hey, this property could not appraise at the price that they offered. Do you want to go through this all over again? Like, what are your feelings on this? Because we could start all over. Like, how important is the money over selling your house and getting into your new property? Setting those expectations, having an honest conversation with your client, just so when you get to that part of the transaction, if that happens, they're not like, why didn't you say anything to me ahead of time that this is where we're going to be if this happens, kind of thing. And, in today's market, those buyers, they're probably not still going to be around. It's people are looking for homes and they're hungry and they're out there, but that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be potentially other buyers that are just starting the process and could be interested. But for the seller, it's frustrating. They've got to start all over, so ideally you don't even get to that phase. You have the conversation up front and everyone's on the same page all the way through, so that you don't have to go through that type of situation, which is, this is why Bob is mentioning is because, we are seeing this happen, where people are finding themselves in these situations. Bob, do you want to share the example that you had mentioned when we spoke yesterday?
Yeah, so great topical a great example is an appraisal that Sam and I have in right now for a modest home in Weymouth. And the house went under agreement for something close to 440. The appraisal came in at 413. Okay, and so that's a huge difference, right? Even above where, even below where the house was listed at. Now, I think in this scenario, I think really what happened, I think, being objective and looking from the outside looking in, I think that as realtors, I think we have to be really careful about cherry picking the comps that we want to use because it fits what we'd like to tell our sellers, right? Especially, the house went under. So actually, I'm wrong, because the house went under agreement for over asking, way over where the appraisal came in at. But I do think, in hindsight, I think that the listing agent could have said, look, the house just down the street, right around the corner in March, just sold for 410. Okay. The house that's just a little beyond that just sold for 420, and it's not as close to the train tracks as we are. Okay. Like that sort of thing. But I think really what ended up happening is the realtor cherry picked some comps in the area that were, sold last August, last September, comps that were 2 miles away from the home and not half a mile or a quarter of a mile away, because it really fit where the realtor wanted that house price to be. And I guess at the end of the day, the realtor was right, because the house had multiple offers and went under agreement for, close to 440. But they still had that appraisal hurdle. And the offer was accepted with a borrower who had max financing with an FHA loan. And so we really have two issues with an FHA offer being accepted. One is it was max financing. So the borrower coming to the closing with the extra $40,000 to make up the difference might as well be $40 million. They don't have the money, right? The other thing to keep in mind, and this is really, really important, guys, is that FHA appraisals stick with the home for 4 months. So let's say, we're doing our best right now to keep this thing together. But let's say the sellers say, you know what, I can get 440 for this house all day long. It went under agreement. We're just going to call another one of our buyers that made an offer like Scott talked about, and hopefully we get lucky. Well, if that house goes back on the market in the 440 price range in our area, that's FHA sweet spot all day long, right? So every single offer that we get in now in this new house, and we're going to get multiple offers again, right? Because it's a crazy market. But how many of those multiple offers are going to be FHA offers? Now, even with those new buyers, FHA buyers, using another lender, they still have to use the appraisal that Radius Financial Group used. So let's say that we get half a dozen offers in on this house, and 2 or 3 of them are FHA offers. You have to disregard those altogether because they're going to have the same appraisal that we use. Now you're left with only a handful of those other conventional offers, right? So the power that you have putting that house back in the market in this case isn't as strong as it might have been otherwise, if it wasn't an FHA borrower. So just keep that in mind, that once an FHA appraisal happens, it sticks with that house for 4 months, even if the new buyer is using a different lender, because that appraisal gets basically uploaded to FHA's database.
Is that also true for VA and rural housing?
I don't think it is, but I'll confirm that.
Hey, Bob, this is Dennis.
Hey, Dennis.
Hey, so you mentioned something about about eliminating the appraisal contingency. If someone's putting 10% down, let's just say, and they're not doing FHA, is that all that needs to be done? Is just to remove that contingency and then they can move forward with it?
Yeah, you can remove that contingency, but of course, just be really careful. So the borrower should have a lot of money backing themselves up, because if you remove the appraisal contingency and you can't get mortgage financing because of it, now you're in, because the appraisal comes in low, I mean, not because you remove the appraisal contingency, the borrower really has to come to the closing with the difference between the purchase price and the appraised value. So if the borrower is putting 10% down and at a $500,000 purchase price, their loan amount's $450,000. They're coming to the closing with $50,000 plus closing costs and escrows. Now let's say that the appraisal came in at $475,000. They're buying the house for $500,000. Appraisal comes in at $475,000. Now the borrower is coming to the closing with their $47,500, which is their 10% down payment, plus the difference between that $500 and the $475 appraisal. So that's $25,000. So now you're looking at, $47,500 plus the $25,000. Now we're looking at $72,500 as opposed to what they were, almost $25,000 more. So the borrower just has to be willing to do that. And you just never know what the house is going to appraise out at.
Right. So if they feel, we love this house, no matter what, we want to buy this house, Dennis, this is what we want to do, that's fine, as long as you have the extra money to bring to the closing, because the bank's not going to give you that difference, right?
That's exactly right. There are some other things too that you can do that really, if somebody's putting down more than max financing, I put together a scenario for you guys. I'll share it with you now if you don't mind. Where I have a scenario where a house is under agreement for $500,000 and the borrower is putting 20% down. Okay, and we have 2 scenarios here. Scenario 1, borrower is putting 20% down. Scenario number 2, for some reason I couldn't get my computer to work for me today. So here's my note: 85% loan to value, so 15% down because the appraisal came in at 471. So in this scenario, I have buyers buying the house for $500,000, loan amount's $400,000. Here's their cash to close with everything included, $110,000, just about $110,000, right? Monthly payment $2,284. In scenario number 2 over here, the house appraised for $471. Now, what I can do in this scenario is basically have the borrower still come to the closing with almost the same amount of cash, keep their monthly payment the same. But what I did was I built in a half a point for them paying PMI up front. So now in this scenario, the borrower doesn't have to pay the $15,000 or so difference. They're just paying PMI. Their cash to close is almost the same. Heck, I bet the seller would even pay that extra $2,000 if they needed to keep this thing going. Really, at the end of the day, it's the same for the borrower. If it were max financing, like 3% down or 5% down, I really don't have that kind of flexibility to do something like this. But if the borrower is putting 10% down and they're good to go, and the house comes in a little bit light, the appraisal came in a little light, then I can just increase the upfront PMI a little bit, and that's going to save the borrower likely thousands of dollars compared to paying the difference between the purchase price and the appraised value.
Wouldn't they normally not have PMI if they put down 20%?
That's correct. But think about, so with a lender, we use the lesser of the appraised value or the purchase price, right? So
Gotcha. So then it falls below the 80/20 then.
exactly, because we don't care about the difference between the appraisal and the purchase price, right? So if the buyer wants to buy the house for $1 million, but the appraisal came in at 400,000, if the buyer wants to throw an extra $600 at the seller, I don't really care. But we're only using that 400 as a starting point, and anything below that is what we give them credit for equity for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great example. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, you got it.
Say, Bob.
Yep.
This is Janet. So I'm just wondering if when you have a situation like that, where you get a buyer who's overbid, are you able to, should you be asking for this agreement in advance of the P&S, or that it's incorporated into the P&S, that the buyer will make up the difference at closing? Or would you recommend that there be some kind of proof of funds before you enter into such an agreement?
Maybe even something like reaching out to their lender, or maybe trying to get maybe getting a second pre-approval, something like that. I think that's always, anytime a listing agent calls me to vet a pre-approval, especially in multiple offer situation, I'm thinking I'm working with a pro, right? Yeah. So I think that if you had maybe 2 pre-approvals, one where, one based on the purchase price as agreed, and I'm just sort of spitballing here, but then the second one being, a pre-approval at the same loan amount, but also at the, let's say, listing price, so you can show that the borrower can get financing both for the scenario as it stands, and also kind of like the worst case scenario, And then as far as verbiage goes, just reach out to your attorney to help with verbiage per the purchase and sale and or the offer. I think that's really important. They can help, whether it's Carla or anybody we work with, Ariel, and anybody from Crowley and Cummings, they do a great job.
Right. So the last thing I want is to represent a owner, seller, and have the deal fall apart at the last minute. So obviously, the more they put down up front, the better. Yeah,
I would say so. And even in our area, it's not like we're selling, $2 million condos and it comes in at 1.75. It's not like we're doing that, but even something like 10% down, and it's borrower specific, but that gives me the ability to really absorb a really fair chunk of the lower appraisal into a new loan amount.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, I think as seller agents representing a homeowner selling a home, a lot of these questions and discussion, I think, is important to have up front. And I think we talk about it in some of the scripts classes as well, explaining to the seller that you got to sell a home twice, first to the buyer and then to their appraiser. I've told this before, but I had a situation where I had a home that I thought we priced it a little bit on the high end, but then again, because of the water views, I thought that might, bring in the value. And we did get multiple offers, and I actually got like 20,000 above the asking price, but I was a little nervous about the appraisal end of it. So I made a phone call to the lender, as you mentioned, Bob, and just had a conversation and asked a little bit more about this buyer. And, he probably told me a bit more than he should have, but he mentioned that, if they wanted to pay for $1 million home, they definitely have the funds to do so. He explained he was a heart surgeon at a hospital in Boston and all that. So that gave my sellers the confidence to work with that. And fortunately, when we accepted the offer, we also wrote in, per the attorney, that regardless of the appraisal, that the buyer would hold to their offer amount. And it was a good thing we did, because what ended up happening is it actually appraised $70,000 below the agreed upon price. Wow. And the buyer came through with the 70 grand. because he had the funds, and that we identified that he had the means to do so up front. Now that may be an isolated case. That's probably not your norm, but the point being just to ask the questions and discuss all this stuff with the seller up front.
Well, it is kind of normal if you're accepting any offers over asking, really. Like, what you did was the right thing.
Yeah.
So that whether another house had water views or not, even if you were nervous or not, like, you know, I am a little emotional because, as Bob said, this is an appraisal that I got in. But I think having that conversation up front is awesome, Bill, and for anybody, because it also helps with the emotional aspect that comes along with it coming in low. You know, a seller doesn't want to hear that their house isn't worth it. And by having that conversation up front, whether those buyers could make up the difference, whether they couldn't, you still had that conversation. And that's, to me, is the most important part.
I have a quick question. And I have to talk kind of quietly because I have people sleeping in my house. Can you guys hear me?
I can, yeah.
Okay, thanks. So I had a condo that I sold, and we were concerned it was going to appraise for less, and 3 offers. And then I talked to all the agents, and they said, nope, we're not going to make up the difference in the appraisal. So then what do you do?
I think
If it doesn't appraise?
Yeah, tell your seller. I mean, really, at the end of the day, for that, I feel like, you know, you're basically guaranteeing that your seller gets top market value for their home either way, right? And so let the seller make the decision at that point. But I'm not a listing agent, sorry. I was just outside looking in. To me, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's what I did. I said, your place is just going to top out, and we don't have any cash buyers. So, and they're not willing to make up the difference. So you might need to concede a few thousand. We might need to meet in the middle. And it worked out that way. And then sure enough, it appraised. I think Missy, you're on mute.
That's good. I have a great script for you on that, Brian. It's really, what's more important to you, the money or the move? And I use that in all different types of situations, but at some point they have to make the decision. What's more important to me, you know, that 5 or 10 grand or the move? Do I want to, you know, back up everything and start over again? Or is it really about the move? So,
but I do think it's really important to do this beforehand and Sean Anderson staged the place. And after the staging, they're like, oh my God, it looks even more amazing. Let's list it for even higher. And I said, no. And then, so that was a big mistake too. Like, don't list it higher. But I said, we're already too high. I can tell you now. And I'm very concerned about the appraisal. So I actually hope that we don't have multiple over ask offers, because we're just going in the wrong direction if that is the case. Because you're going to have this number in your head as, wow, look at what this is sold at. And then the home inspection went great. That's great. We're moving on. Oh, the appraiser showed up. Now we're back to 20,000. We got to go rewind the other way, $20,000.
And one of the reasons that's especially painful is because you've already had the home. At that point, a month into the transaction, the buyers and sellers are both sick of each other, right? So the appraisal comes in $10,000 low, and the listing agent breaks that news to the sellers, and the sellers are thinking that the buyers are trying to pull an extra 10 grand, steal an extra 10 grand from their children's inheritance 100 years from now, right? Like, it gets that, you know, but if you've had that conversation at the beginning and it's expected, it's money that they hopefully haven't started counting yet, you know?
Well, they also think that it only falls on the buyer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it doesn't only fall on the buyer. It falls on getting the financing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
So
and
I try to set that expectation too, is it's not fully on them, guys. Like, they're concerned when it doesn't come back at what they're paying for. You got to put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah.
I always joke that who's really buying the house? It's the bank that's really buying the house.
Yeah.
They just happen to pick that particular property for the bank to buy. And the other thing that I think has made a difference that I have seen is making sure that the listing agent shows up to meet the appraiser. Be there. Bring your comps. You know, even if they're not going to look at them, at least you're making an effort. You know, I've known appraisers who've been willing to, you know, listen to me talk about the fact that maybe a comp is a corporate relo or a divorce or something that I'm aware of. They will sometimes take that into consideration. But I do think being there, you know, I once did just a year-long study of an office that I was in at the time, and the only appraisal problems we ever had were for listings who just gave the lockbox code to the appraiser. You got to show up and meet the appraiser.
It's important, you know, for the appraiser, some appraisers out there will say, no, I don't want them.
Yep,
But I think the
they will.
majority would like to know where you were coming from as a listing agent when you put your comps together.
Yeah.
You know, otherwise you're just hoping, right? You're just hoping that the appraiser thinks the same as you and see you later, you know, but.
I mean, and I think pointing out upgrades or, you know, why a particular neighborhood is more desirable than another neighborhood, you know, because they're not always coming from your town. They're not always coming from that subject town.
Right. You know, one other thing that I would throw out there, and I didn't think about it until now, but with COVID, lenders now on conventional appraisals have the option of either doing ordering what's called a desktop appraisal, where the appraiser just basically gets the information off of MLS, doesn't leave their desk to do the appraisal. So it doesn't go out to the house, doesn't even take a picture of the front. Or an exterior only appraisal where the appraiser will just go take a picture of the front and then do their research based on public record and what's in MLS, or a full appraisal, of course, too. And at the beginning, I didn't really think that there was a difference. I thought an appraiser would know, you know, what an updated kitchen looks like by looking at your pictures online. But Bob Hadge was on the call about a month ago, and he said nothing beats walking through a property. And I was really surprised by that because appraisers look at homes differently than realtors or buyers do, right? They're just mechanics, beds, baths, square footage, that sort of stuff. But, you know, Bob is the best appraiser I know by far, common sense wise and technically. And that went a long way with me. So you guys asking, requesting that the appraiser does a full appraisal, I think is really important, especially for homes that are updated. Now, if you think that there are some safety issues with the home, you're missing some railings, there's some unfinished projects, right? That's not disclosed in MLS. Maybe at that point you want to talk with the lender about the possibility, or talk with the buyer's agent about the possibility of doing a desktop or an exterior only, so you don't get hit with a subject to repairs, you know, when the appraisal first comes in. So a couple things to think about there.
Can the seller request?
Circle back on a lot of the comments that we made. I'm sorry, Dennis, go ahead.
Can the seller request a copy of the appraisal even though they didn't pay for it?
With the buyer's permission. We always release it with the buyer's permission, because really there's nothing that they, you know, there's nothing that on there that really shouldn't be disclosed, you know, but the buyers do pay for it. It is their appraisal, it's their property, so we get their permission first. And I just think as a sense of professional courtesy for me, sending that appraisal over and just letting them know that we're not pulling any punches here. You know, we're not that sneaky lender trying to squeak an extra 20 grand out for my client. So here it is, you know, and if you see a real mistake in there, please let us know, because I know our buyers also want this thing to appraise out. They want the house. So please, if you see a mistake in there, if it's 4 beds and not 3 like the appraisal shows, please tell us, you know.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. What were you going to say, Miss?
So I was going to say, thanks, Bob. I was going to say a lot of the comments that have been made have been around having conversations with your sellers up front. And that really is the most important aspect. And with the buyers as well. And, you know, in a market like this, you have to think about whether you're on the sell side or the buy side, you have to be thinking, what does the end game look like? What does the finish line look like? And think about, you know, all these scenarios that could roll out. And granted, your clients have to make the decisions. We can't make the decisions for the sellers or for the buyers. But if the sellers have made an educated decision based on the correct information that you've given them, then they shouldn't be surprised with, you know, really anything that happens, because you've already prepared them for it. I have sort of a perfect storm of concern about an appraisal that has just come up this week, or last week actually, where I have a property under agreement in South Weymouth, and it's an unusual property in that it's stunningly beautiful. Brian, to your point, it's beautifully staged, but this is how the homeowner lives. And every improvement that she's made has just been so beautiful, but it's kind of a quirky house, and it faces sideways, and it's a shared driveway, and it's a busier street. And there have been some lower comps around it, and there haven't been any comps that are a 3-bedroom, 2,000 square foot colonial. They've been ranches or capes or farmhouses. So there aren't any slam dunk comps right around it. So last week, the borrower's agent or the buyer's agent had said to me, we're all set on the appraisal. It's been waived. We're just moving forward to loan commitment. Fabulous. This was on Monday. Tuesday, I got a call from an appraisal company to do a walkthrough appraisal. I'm like, oh crap, this isn't good. So, just out of courtesy, I just wanted to ensure before I met the appraiser and incurred an appraisal fee for the borrower, do we actually need this appraisal? Is this a cross communication? And they did indeed need the appraisal. Underwriting had reversed their decision. They wanted an appraisal. I met the appraiser last night at 7:20. It was his only available appointment. I already knew I was in trouble at 7:20. Called me at 7:30 to say I'll be there closer to 8. It was dark. I had comps and I had the P&S. I walked him through. I pointed out every switch plate that had been replaced, recessed lighting and top of the line vinyl plank. And, I did my absolute best, but I did my best to sell it. That's not feeling so good to me, and I've made the assumption, and maybe Bob and Samantha, you can tell me if I'm right, but I tend to think that if the appraisal was ordered 2.5 weeks after the P&S was signed, initially waived, now necessary, is that borrower really close to not qualifying? And that's why we need the appraisal? That's what I'm thinking.
No, my guess is, every lender is different, but my guess is that wouldn't be the case. I think it's more along the lines of maybe a mortgage broker, not a bank, or even let's say a mortgage. So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac do allow for appraisal waivers. And I don't think there'd be a case where we would overrule that unless the only way that I could see that is if maybe in MLS, let's say, Missy, your listing had something like, some comments in the description saying missing 5 windows, buyer's responsibility to pay, right? Or to do. Like then at that point, if underwriting saw that, then maybe they would require it. But the only thing that I can think of, Miss, is if it was a small bank, then that small bank doesn't allow for appraisal waivers. Or if it's a mortgage broker, that mortgage broker has Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac findings that say appraisal waiver, good to go. He says, woohoo, we're good to go. And then they send it out to whatever lender they send it to for underwriting. And that lender says, no, we don't allow for appraisal waivers,
Yeah. Okay.
That would be my guess.
I won't panic then. I want to say it's with Cross Country. Yeah, it's with Cross Country.
Oh, wow.
The appraiser should the lender though should let you know what's up.
Yeah.
They should let you know specifically why the appraisal wasn't needed initially, but now it is. They could have also changed programs.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. I appreciate the insight.
Yeah, you got it. So I'll share something else with you guys too. In that appraisal that I was talking about earlier, that in Sam's appraisal, the listing agent did send us comps that we should send with some commentary that we could send to the appraiser for their review, just I guess reconsideration. And of course, with the those comps was the listing agent's comments about how many multiple offers they had and how so many other homes that are on the market now in the area are under agreement.
Closing next week that are
all multiple offers too. And the appraiser wrote in the addendum something I thought was really, really simple, but something we should all really think about. The quote was, although the property has multiple offers, appraisal values are based on market sales and not what a buyer is willing to pay for the home. And of course, that's such common sense. It's so simple, but when we as listing agents put a house in the market and we're seeing the kind of pressure we're seeing now, the house is worth $440 all day because they probably got half a dozen offers that is, you know, that show the market demand is there for 440. The house is worth what somebody's willing to pay for it, right? Like anything. But the appraisal is always going to be based off of last month's, last year, sometimes sales, right? We have to remember that. Sometimes an appraiser can use under agreement or the multiple offer part as justification for them being on their tiptoes, right? Maybe an extra 1 or 2% that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And they use the multiple offer things to show, and even 2% is kind of strong, but they use the multiple offer thing to show that there's market demand there. But if we're talking about a house appraising for 5 to 10% or more below the agreed upon price, I don't care how many offers you had, we need you know, real fair comps to get us up to that extra 10% or whatever the number ends up being.
Their other argument was that there was a lack of comps due to COVID, which is hard to quantify and put into a price to be dinged for the appraiser as well, because that's, again, nothing within our control. And if there's not a comp, you know, a pandemic is not going to be an excuse when there are actually comps within March. So they said there weren't more because of COVID. They really tried.
I don't know. I would argue that though in Weymouth, not that you have the ability to argue with the appraiser, but in Weymouth, there are always comps all over the place.
Well, and that's exactly what we saw. I mean, the comp, we had 3 comps within a tenth of a mile. One was 1/5 of a mile away from the property. So literally like 2 doors down, right? And I think that this was just a case of the listing agent, 2 things. One, getting swept up in the multiple offers and look at how much we sold your home for, and not having, and then even justifying that in their own minds by cherry picking some homes that are within a 2-mile radius, which is probably pretty okay, right? But it's not okay when you have 3 or 4 comps within a 1/4 of a mile that have sold in the last 6 months, right? You know, so I think that happened. And then, you know, they also, I don't think, had that conversation about, hey, don't count this extra money just yet.
Yeah. There were a lot of emotions on this one.
Yeah, I could imagine.
Yeah.
But
I'm a
that's
little
where
depressed,
having-
Bob. You're bringing me down.
What'd you
I'm
say,
a
Don?
little depressed.
Yeah. Well,
Tell me that the rates are super low. Tell me something good.
hold on. I've got a good one for you. You ready for it? If
Tell me something.
if low
Donna, your
appraisals-
hair looks great.
Yeah, it
Thank
does.
you. Yours did too.
I did a pre-approval for somebody buying a house or making an offer on a house in Duxbury this weekend. It was on the market for 1.3. So these people were going in 1.67. Like, we want this house, right? The appraisal or the offer, and they didn't get the house. It went for over 1.9.
Oh my God.
Welcome to the new world order, friends.
God, even
Wow.
the high level stuff, that's crazy.
I hope that was one of your loans, Bob.
No,
Yeah.
man, you kidding me? No, I'm happy.
Raise your
to
hand
buy
if you had that buyer.
That's it. That's it. That's it.
Wow.
And now they're going to be shocked when the appraisal doesn't come in.
Yeah, but they're probably a cardiologist so that they can just make up the difference. So
That's
let's
right.
not worry
That's right.
about them, okay?
Yep.
But it is, I mean, I think I had an amazing open house. You know, we had more offers in this house that I listed last week than I've ever had before. And I'm just very concerned. I mean, there was, what was it called back in the day? Irrational exuberance. There was irrational exuberance. And I'm very concerned that we're not going to, meet the appraisal because they're also overpaying for something. So the real problem is that, they need to be able to overpay for what they're buying. So they've already spent that money in their head.
Right.
So I'm bringing cookies to the appraiser.
Can we do like a role play of what and how you would talk to the buyer and seller?
Absolutely. Yeah, we can definitely set that up. Unless anybody is ready to jump right in right now. Anybody willing to role play right now with Trisha?
Trisha, I'm ready.
Oh, go for it.
Okay.
I'm gonna shut my camera off so you can't look at me. Don't look at me.
You tell me, am I going to be the realtor or am I going to be the buyer or the seller?
You're gonna be the realtor.
Okay. Am I the selling realtor or am I the buyer's realtor?
Sellers.
Sellers. And are you the seller?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So let's see here. I'm just writing down some numbers because I'm not really smart. All right, here we go. All right. So ring, ring.
Hello.
Hey, Trisha, this is Bob with Keller Williams. Hey, how are you?
Hey, Bob. How you doing?
Good, good. Did I catch you at a good time?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, hey, just, of course, we had your open house yesterday. It went really well. All the offers, like I told you, were due today by noon, and we have our offers in. And I just wanted to take a minute to go over some of them with you if you had a minute.
Sure.
All right, awesome. So I do have a handful of offers here, which is really good. Actually, a couple of handfuls worth of offers, okay? We have 8 offers on the home. There's a few of which I can't even read because I think they were written down on a cocktail napkin, so we're just gonna disregard those, okay? But there's a few here that I think we should really talk about. Would it be okay with you, Trisha, if we just kind of fast forwarded to the one that came in over asking?
Yes.
Okay, so the one I think that is really the strongest at this point, believe it or not, we put your house on the market for $449,900. The offer just came in at $525,000. Okay, which is really great news. So they're basically offering you $25,000 more than what you wanted for the property. They're closing within 45 days. They waived their home. I called their lender. They're in fantastic shape. How do you feel about that one?
That sounds really good.
Awesome. Could you use that extra $25,000?
Yeah, I could.
Awesome. Good, good, good. All right. So good news and bad news. We just talked about the good news. Can I talk with you a little bit about, sort of the process and how this might roll out?
Sure.
All right. So they offered $525,000 for the house. They're getting a mortgage. So that lender's going to require an appraisal. In order for them to get the mortgage under the terms that they want, the house has to appraise for $525,000. Okay. If it doesn't appraise for $525,000, there's a chance that the lender might not be approved for the mortgage that they're applying for. And we may have to address this down the road. You might have to come down to meet whatever that appraisal number is. Or hopefully, knock on wood, we keep our fingers crossed, we'll provide the sellers or the appraiser with some comps. So hopefully it comes in at $525,000, but there's a chance it may not. I think it's a slam dunk. It'll come in at $500,000 all day. So we're good to go there. But if we did agree on $525,000, and let's say the house appraises out down the road for $500,000, and worst case scenario, the buyer couldn't come up with any extra money to pay you the difference or anything like that, would you guys be willing to come down to the $500,000 if needed down the road?
Yes.
Okay. So
that was easy.
they're all this easy.
I should say no.
No. Yeah.
Yes.
I know. So, I mean, I think that for me, if I've never done that before with a buyer as a realtor. Obviously, I'm not a realtor, but if I'm on Trisha's end of the line, to me that makes sense. And also, if a month down the road the appraisal comes in, low, then at least we can have that conversation. And hopefully, it doesn't come in at $500,000. Hopefully, it comes in at $510,000 if it's going to come in low. So then at least I can talk with Trisha about, hey, we talked about the house appraising for $5,000 and you said you'd be happy with that. It came in at $510,000. So man, that's just an extra bonus, right? We're good. So but I just think being able to have that conversation up front is just so important because you can remind them about it down the road, even if at that point they've already started counting the money they didn't have yet.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I would have said things like, but But wait, don't we have, isn't it a seller's market? Like, why wouldn't I get it?
Yeah.
That's what I would have gone with. Maybe Trish was easy, but
Right,
you know,
right.
or
That
well,
was so easy.
what are the other ones at? So this one's at over asking. So what are the other ones at then?
Right.
Well, if there's more than one over asking, what do you mean I'm not going to get that extra 25,000?
Yeah. Or if there's somebody, you know, there's somebody at 5.25 with a mortgage contingency and an appraisal contingency. Maybe there's someone at 5.15 with no appraisal contingency. And, you know, you take that extra 15 because it's a slam dunk as opposed to rolling the dice at the 5.25 and hoping for that extra 10, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. But
So you gotta be careful when you read.
What's that?
I was just saying, it's amazing we ever actually get to a closing table. You
So
consider
true.
the hurdles that we need to clear. It's really and truly amazing we get there.
It's true, especially under such tight time constraints.
Right.
Like, you know, 30-day closings, that's kind of normal, right? And think about what I can't clean my garage in 30 days, right? You know, never mind buying
Well,
and
you could.
what the heck, you know, but we do that every day, all day long. Crazy. But I think that, you know, getting back to the conversation Trish and I just had, man, that's down the road if and when the appraisal comes in low. It's a completely different conversation now because it should be anyway,
Right.
because we just had that conversation. If I just said, Trisha, 525 girl, how great am I? I'm the best realtor in the world, right? Yeah, you are. High fives all day long. And then a month down the road, the appraisal comes in low and I just took 25 grand from Trisha's pocket. And oh yeah, by the way, I'm still collecting just about the same 12.5 for commission that I was at 5.25, you know? So the only person that loses here is poor Trisha, right? Because I didn't set her expectations properly. So we all look like crooks. Listing agent, buyer's realtor, the attorney, yeah, everybody.
But you know what?
Thank you.
As listing agents, what's really tricky when we go on that listing appointment and perhaps we're one of several agents that they're interviewing, you know, when I look at comps in the area, I'm certainly going to want to focus on some of the higher end sales because this is what the seller wants to hear. This is what the seller's being told by their neighbors and their, you know, non-realtor friends that, you know, it's a seller's market. And, you know, there's plenty of agents out there. They're going to say, you know, if it's a $400,000 home, oh, I'll get you $450 all day long. So, you know, is that balance of, you know, being truthful and being realistic with your comp analysis and risking, you know, pretty much not getting the listing because somebody else is telling a prettier story, regardless of whether they're going to be able to back it up, you know, 30 days later, once, you know, they're going through the appraisal process. So
Yeah.
That's
The
a
challenge.
great point, Bill. And I think just kind of having that conversation when you're in that stage with the seller where you're going up against other agents that are going after the same listing, saying to them like, listen, I can tell you everything you want to hear, like the butterflies and the rainbows, but at the end of the day, I want to get your home sold. I don't want to tell you what you want to hear. I want to tell you what I know is going to happen and set your expectations for success here, rather than in 6 months or in 3 months, we find ourselves in a position where you're having to relist your home and start all over. And chances are, if you're having that honest conversation with the seller and telling them like exactly that, if it were me, I'd be like, all right, let's do this. Like, I trust you. Like, you're being honest with me. Because a lot of times people don't want to find themselves in this position again, right? So be honest. Don't be afraid to be the expert and speak up in the beginning and communicate and tell the clients what they need to hear, not what they want to hear.
Exactly.
There's a simple script for that too, Alicia. You know,
Yeah.
in the initial listing consults, you can always ask the simple question, you know, what would make this a great transaction for you? What does that look like for you? And then you can ask them, what's most important to you? And may say, I need every dollar out of the sale of this property, or they may say, I don't want any headaches, I just want this to be smooth. So if they're being truthful with you, then you can kind of, pitch your strategy on, the pricing strategy and the marketing strategy. And if it works for them, then you've earned their trust forever.
Absolutely.
I think it's important to, I know we're coming toward the end of the time, but I think it's important to, some of the agents on the call have more experience than others. So my thought is, what's the difference between an offer that says property must appraise at or above the purchase price, or an offer that does not come in, that comes in without that language, but maybe, maximum financing with 3% down or 3.5% down. So I remember when values began to increase a couple of years ago dramatically, I had a conversation with an attorney friend about that. What's the difference? Because the appraisal is still part of the mortgage approval process. So what's the difference between whether or not the offer says must appraise at or above purchase price or not? And essentially, as I understood it, the difference is that if the offer includes the appraisal language, essentially you're giving the buyer the automatic option to renegotiate or back out of the deal if it has not appraised at or above the purchase price. Whereas if the language about the appraisal is not on the offer, then it does become a matter of qualifying for the mortgage. And just because it doesn't appraise at the purchase price doesn't mean the borrower doesn't qualify. It would then be up to the lender to issue the denial, and an honest, ethical lender is not going to do that. They're going to instead, like Bob and Samantha would, rework all the numbers and see if they can still make it work and maybe come to the table with $2,000 more instead of the $20,000 difference between the purchase price and the appraisal. So those are two really different things. And it's important that we as listing agents have the understanding of what the differences are, so that if the seller is agreeing to that offer with the appraisal contingency language on the offer, that they understand the ramification of that. Mm-hmm. That's really important to understand.
Definitely. You're right about that.
And as buyer agents, are we writing that into our offers, subject to bank appraisal at or above? I was told to do that by a famous attorney, but
I leave it to the borrower personally, just to see what their tolerances are. Some might be okay with that and some might not be. Some might have to have it written in for any particular offer price. So I have the same conversation with them. And
yeah, you're right.
Ramifications, because if it's on the offer, that could disqualify them from the multiple bid scenario even being considered. So it's
right.
To the buyer.
Yep, I guess it all comes down to that upfront communication and conversation with the buyers in this case.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, before we wrap up today, honestly, I just, I keep saying this, you guys have heard me say it before, whether it was before COVID, in person or whatever, but, being a part of this conversation here every Tuesday is, and I don't know, I guess I'll speak for Sam too, but something that I'm really, really grateful for. I mean, no other office does this. No other office that I know of does this as regularly as we do it, and with as much participation as we have too. And then that includes other Keller Williams offices. I mean, it's the middle of the summer and, 2 weeks or 3 weeks before Labor Day, and we had 25 people on this call. That's just crazy. And that's normally what we've had through this summer too. No other office has the kind of conversations that we're having right now that I know of, none. Sam and I tried recreating this with another office locally in an office that was just
less inspired.
Well, I mean, but it's an established office that's been around and does a ton of work, like out in the 495, Route 95 area. And regularly we'd have 2 or 3 people on the call.
And they have how many people?
Yeah, they have 90 offices, and it's just something that other people just aren't interested in. You don't know what you don't know, so you think you've got it all figured out, you're good to go, right? But every time I come on this call, I learn something. And I'm just so appreciative of you guys for sticking with this and doing it. And hopefully, Alicia and Sam and me and everybody in the call, we can keep bringing value, because this is just awesome. People pay a lot of money for classes like this out there. We get it for free. So it's just awesome. So thank you guys very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And everybody should bring a friend.
That was amazing.
Invite another agent. Invite a non-KW agent to join us. Bring a friend.
Absolutely. You
That's a
can
great
you can
idea.
share this
Yes.
information with friends that you know that are outside of KW that could be interested in joining KW. Share the link with them before the masterminds. Invite them to this conversation. Show them the value of working here. And Bob and Sam, we appreciate everything you guys do for us in this office. Thank you for saying that.
Yes,
We have an
yes.
incredible group here. I agree with you. KW Showcase is where it's at.
That's it. Rock and roll.
Yes.
All right,
Thank you
guys.
all very
Have
much.
a great week. See you later.
Thank
All right,
you.
guys. Have a
Take
good day.
care.
Thank you. All right.